Hello, and welcome back to another episode of More Than Milestones. I am joined today with Illiyin Morrison, who is a perinatal trauma expert midwife, and we are going to be digging into, I think, what is going to be a really powerful conversation, and I am so excited, and thank you so much for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So, yes, I am a perinatal trauma expert midwife. And I suppose if we look at it, it's more commonly known as birth trauma. So that's kind of like, that will make a lot of people go, oh. But really, the way in which I view it is that perinatal period from preconception all through pregnancy and birth, and then sort of years into the postpartum period. So this kind of broadens that term, allowing for those experiences that fall under those umbrellas to be part of that conversation. I have been doing this for about 5 years, and I basically I qualified as a midwife, worked for a few years, didn't enjoy clinical practice, and had a difficult birth with my daughter and kind of had to work my way out of it. And through that, essentially created a framework for working through perinatal trauma as the years went on. So the way in which I support people in their traumas is through debriefing experiences. So people meet with me internationally, so it's all remote. And we work it through from start to finish and give them the tools to understand what happened to them, but also their responses to what happened to them so that everything remains in context. Through that, I ended up writing my book, The Birth Debrief, and having my own podcast, which is also called The Birth Debrief. And yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at. I mean, over the years, I sort of developed it further, and I'm helping people to work through their grief experiences as well. Birth and grief are very closely interlinked, but this is grief around like the loss of people, the loss of identity, the breakdown of relationships, friendships. And most recently, I have developed a service for like long-term listening clients. So people who really need help to reframe their thought processes, their behaviors, their practices, their responses. And that is over 3, 6, 9 or 12 weeks where we kind of really get to know one another. I'm all about long-term relationships and
Yeah.
understanding people. So that's a little bit about me.
Oh my gosh, that is incredible. And I feel like the work that you are doing is so incredibly important across the board because birth trauma, I mean, specific to birth trauma, I feel that it is such a huge conversation that like very few people are actually talking about or actually providing support for or understanding how to work through it. And yeah, it's so valuable. And I would love to kind of start there if that works, where we really like talk about the definition of birth trauma, because I think normalizing conversations around it is really important, and understanding that what trauma looks like or feels like for one person is completely different than what it might look like for someone else. So when you are sharing about birth trauma and starting that conversation, what does that really look like for you?
Yeah. So interestingly, when I got into this work, it was that I'd had my daughter and it was a planned home birth that ended in an emergency cesarean section. So we've got sort of two ends of the spectrum of birth. And I felt really kind of peculiar postnatally. I really, really struggled, and there was nothing out there. So what you tend to have is people who can get support for PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. And that has sort of very strong symptoms of sort of flashbacks, nightmares, cold sweats, similarly to what a veteran might suffer, where someone thinks they're about to die and it elicits a very visceral response. But actually, there's a huge proportion of people who don't quite meet that, but are also not really happy. And they're having sort of some of those symptoms, but they're also feeling dissatisfied, they're upset, they're feeling like they're disappointed or traumatized, but perhaps don't have the symptoms of PTSD. When I think about perinatal trauma, and we'll put it in the context of birth, but what it really is an internal response to an external situation that can trigger symptoms of PTSD where you think, I'm going to die here. Now, one of the most important things that I want to highlight in this conversation is that it's an internal response, meaning that each person can have a different internal response based on who they are. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no external response as well, because for some people, that trauma is also external or only external. That's fine. But it means that we can't give a blanket definition. We can't say, well, you lost a lot of blood, that's birth trauma, when actually someone could have what could be defined as a very low risk, normal birth, but internally they are howling. Internally, that has not felt safe, that has not felt comfortable, that has felt deeply traumatic. So I don't tend to give an actual definition, because I say to people when I speak to my clients, I'm like, you tell me, how did it feel for you?
Mm.
And that allows them to have ownership over their experience of their births or their postpartum or their breastfeeding or whatever it might look like. And so generally speaking, it is that response, but overall, it is something that is deeply personal and has a very personal context for each individual.
Yeah. And I think something that you just said is so powerful, in that it is your internal response to an external stimuli. And so I know that we had talked right before we started recording, and I was like, I don't know how much I'm going to share about what I would consider 2 out of 3 of mine that were fairly traumatic for me. But one of the biggest things that I think made it challenging for me to even identify with having had a traumatic birth was that I didn't remember most of it. Like the initial part was what it was, but it was really my experience after, where I woke up and I didn't know where my daughter was. She was in the NICU. I had hemorrhage. And that moment of panic shaped truly like my entire postpartum experience with my oldest. And I ended up with postpartum anxiety. And in hindsight, looking back at it, I can see how so much of it was shaped by that experience, but it wasn't. It was hard for me to actually say, yeah, I had a traumatic birth, because I really didn't, I didn't remember,
That in itself, like if we think of the births of our children, they are some of the most life-altering events in our lives. And to not be able to remember that can be a trauma in and of itself, because you've gone from sort of like A to Z. And what about all those letters in the middle? And suddenly you're handed this baby and it's like, I missed something. I missed a part of this. I didn't live this part of it.
Mhm.
And like with every process, we need to know the steps. Like we need to know how we got somewhere. So if I'm going out, I want to know how I left my house, how I got in my car, how I knew where I was going and how I arrived. I don't want to close my eyes and wake up somewhere else or in a different situation. And a lot of the
Mhm.
time, because we are so wrapped up in this sort of idea or the benchmark of birth being surviving it and having a healthy baby at the end of it, those things aren't validated. It's like, well, you lost blood, we put you to sleep, you woke up, but here's your baby, and baby's fine, and you're fine, everyone's alive. And so actually it becomes very difficult to validate having any sort of negative or upsetting feelings, because you met the benchmark. Baby's
Mhm.
alive, you're alive, everything's fine, healthy baby, that's it. But actually, the benchmark is so
Mhm.
different. The benchmark has to be that we live our experiences and that we are aware of, that things happen with us and not to us. And so even if they go differently than we would have wanted, we're able to reconcile it, because it's sort of like a puzzle and we can put the pieces together and we can work it through. And we deserve that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what you just said made me think of your words. I read this quote of yours where you said, time and time again, it is the lack of advocacy, autonomy, control, or consent rather than the physical aspect of the birth that lingers and informs parenthood. And that for me was so eye-opening, because there are so many things that are happening to you. Like there are, especially when things start to go haywire. So I would love for you to kind of just expand on that a little bit, because I feel like that quote really stuck out for me. It just feels so powerful in this conversation.
Yeah, so anyone who engages with my work understands that birth work is life work. And our advocacy and our agency needs to be applied there as it does to every other situation that we're in. And the impact of not being able to have a voice and of kind of feeling like things are happening to us. And this is not a slight against doctors. It's not a slight against people who are here to help and things like that. But it's about saying, actually, this is a collaborative process and I need to know. And that's what that advocacy looks like. It looks like being someone saying, okay, how do you feel about this? This is what we're going to do next, so that you understand what is happening, so that you can say, okay, fine, that makes sense. I understand that we have to do what we have to do. Ultimately, we all want to come out of birth alive, and we want to have our children and we want them to be healthy and happy. And so we won't go against things that are explained to us in a way that we understand. And that's where that agency and that advocacy comes into it. And our advocacy looks so different. Different people have different types of advocacy and different advocates. And, if you're in hospital, your obstetrician has to be an advocate, your midwife is an advocate, your nurse is an advocate, but also in your family, your partner is an advocate. You and all of those people are advocates for the unborn child who has no voice. And part of that advocacy is that we want to make sure that everyone knows what's happening. We want to make sure that everyone feels as safe as possible and that they are part of their experience. And that's what it all comes down to. And I say to people, take that thing and extend it further. Say, when my children are growing up, when they're going to school, when they're in childcare, when they are having doctor's appointments, I have a voice. I can use it. I'm an advocate. And these people are also advocating for our well-being. This is, like I said before, it's collaborative.
Yeah, yeah. And I think part of understanding kind of advocating is also understanding what true informed consent is, because and this is not a knock at hospitals. I had all three of my children there. I was thankful to have been there for what we needed at the time. But in our healthcare system in general, we are not often getting fully informed consent, especially in those moments of emergency. And I think that can be something that's really hard for people to wrap their head around or understand even what that looks like. And so in birth or in, even developing your plan, if you want to have a birth plan, how do you encourage people to understand what that really means? Like what informed consent and being able to advocate for yourself really means?
Yeah. So if we take it back to birth plans, in my book, The Birth Debrief, I remember submitting the copy of the birth plan to my editor, and she was like, well, where's the rest of it? And I was like, that is it. And in this birth plan, it says, who are you? Who are your advocates? What do you want? What do you categorically not want? And how do you like to be referred to? And then the last thing is, how do you respond to sort of pain or discomfort? And within all of those umbrellas, that's our advocacy, because it's like, call me by my name. These are the people who are here to support my voice. These are the things that I'm really okay with. These are happy for me. Also, these are my red lines. And it means that when we're reaching those red lines, we're going, oh, this is someone's red lines. This is how we need to have a conversation around them, because they can be moved, but we can have a conversation around them. This is where informed consent has to be at all times. But it's saying, let's talk it through. Let's talk it through. And part of informed consent, true informed consent, is someone understanding what is going to happen to them and saying, okay. It doesn't mean that they're going to be happy about it. Because let's say, for example, in my situation, I did not want a cesarean section, not because I had a problem with a cesarean section, but because I wanted my baby at home. But equally, it was like, right, I need to know what's happening, why it's happening, and I will give my consent, but at least I can say, I said yes to that, that I knew what that was and I said yes to it. And that
Yeah.
matters. And obviously there are scenarios where that can be really difficult because, birth can go ways in which we don't want it to go. And, it can be difficult to obtain. But I often think even in an emergency scenario, lots of people are in that space. And one person taking the time in that space to say, this is what is happening. This is a life or death situation or a difficult situation. We're going to have to do this, but I want to hear you say, okay. Our agency over our person does not disappear just because a situation is emergent, unless, of course, where there are circumstances where we are not cognitively able or mentally able to grant consent. That is the only time where informed consent can be overruled. That is the law here in the UK, that actually if someone is cognitively and mentally able to consent or to withdraw consent, that applies. Now, if they are unconscious, we can't do anything. And again, like I said, my work is about your whole life. So that same consent that you have over your body in your life and the same consent that we try and teach our children to have over their bodies applies. This is your person. You give permission and you take it away.
I love that. Oh, something you said gave me full body chills, and I don't think I ever thought about it until this moment, but the nurse, one of the last things I remember was a nurse. I remember her face. I don't know her name. Wish I did. She leaned over me and she said, "I'm going to hit this button behind your head and a lot of people are going to come rushing in." And
Okay.
I don't know what I did or said or anything like that, but I will never forget her face right there, because when everybody came rushing in, she stayed right with me. She was right there. My husband was right here. And that is something that I've held on to, I guess, in that moment, as like, she was like a light for me. And she was the only person, and this is not knocking everybody else that came in. She was the only person that like actually said that to me and gave me any sort of heads up about what was about to happen. I think there's so much power in healthcare providers also hearing that like those moments and your decisions in those moments matter for so long. And that, to me, like where you say my work is about your whole life, I think understanding the impact of a traumatic birth or just the birthing process in general on the first 6 weeks postpartum and beyond, like I don't think I processed anything about it until a year plus later, and I would love for people to understand your perspective on that. Like, how does it impact beyond those 6 weeks in your
Yeah,
experience?
totally. Most of my clients come to me around 18 months. Obviously, there are exceptions where they come before, but generally speaking, I've seen clients from sort of like 15 to 18 months to like 20 years to 50 years postpartum. So this is
Wow.
like it extends. But the reason for that is that actually, like, we deserve all the grace because that postpartum haze, a whole life is relying on you. You have had no moment to even catch your breath before someone says, "This is your baby. By the way, keep it alive. Keep it alive.
Mm-hmm.
Love it, nurture it, raise it, do all these things." But also your life is happening around you as well. So just make sure you do that. Make sure you look after your relationships. Make sure you look after your house. Make sure you see your family. Make sure you do all of
Mm-hmm.
these things. And then something comes in and says, "Oh, don't forget self-care," and all of this stuff. And your brain goes, "Oh, okay, then cool, cool, cool. I'm just going to try and work my way through this fog." And so between feeding, sleepless nights, regressions, and all of those other things, there is very little time for checking in on yourself. And a lot of the time, retrospectively, you realize that you were merely existing, that it was like, I'm just doing, and
Mm-hmm.
then sometimes it sort of clicks and perhaps they start sleeping a bit better, or maybe they go into their own room, or maybe they go into a childcare provider or something like that. And your brain goes, "Hey, do you remember what happened to you? Yeah, you okay?" Like, And then it's like, "Oh
Yeah.
gosh, like maybe I'm not okay." Like, your body is so incredible and your mind is so powerful and does really smart things to protect you until you have the capacity to confront certain parts. But if I look at my own experience, an example is that I was so determined to breastfeed my daughter. And it wasn't because I had any issue with formula or anything like that, but it was that I felt that I had failed her in her birth and I owed it to her. I owed it to her to get it right. This thing I can do, I've got control over. And I had pumps making those stupid noises. I had topping up. I literally think I spent a good 4 weeks with my tits out, just like this, like a
The
cow.
sound. Oh my God.
The sound. Oh my gosh. And the doctors would say to me, "You can give her formula." And I was like, "No, I'm not doing that." But it became something that in some ways was possibly quite detrimental to me. But I was like, "I'm going to do this." And that's often a
Mhm.
response. And sometimes people think that when you've had a traumatic experience, your immediate response might be to not care for your child and to take a complete disinterest in them. Often that used to be the symptoms that people would look out for postpartum depression. And they would say, "Yeah, mum is not bonding." But there's the other side of it, which is like a hypervigilance where you're like, "I can't have this child out of my sight. I've got to do everything for them." you have an anxiety around
Mhm.
letting them down or not being able to see them or risking them and things like that. And I was on that side of things. And, I remember it being like later on going, that was absolutely a response to feeling like I'd lost control and that I had
Mhm.
let her down. I spent 18 months, my daughter, it was a tank in the end. And she was about 15 kilos and she would only go in the sling. And I would just have her in this sling, like charging down the road, and she would breastfeed all the time. I remember going shopping with my sister and she would breastfeed in the sling, and my sister going, "Your nipple's out." She stopped feeding. Your nipple is just out in like everyone can see. And I was like,
Yeah.
well, it's dead flesh. I can't feel anything anyway, but like, I guess it's hanging out. But it was like, I was so determined. And, I think that's just one example of how traumatic birth experiences can impact how we respond to our children in the postnatal period, but also how we can neglect ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I so resonate with that. I have shared pieces, or a lot of pieces, about postpartum anxiety. And one of the biggest ones for me was I remember going to my 6-week follow-up and seeing that questionnaire that was like, are you thinking about harming yourself? Are you detached? All of those questions. And I was like, oh my God, no, like the opposite. I literally I was picturing I needed to control everything I could control. We were in my bedroom where I knew who was coming in. I knew who was going out. I was monitoring all of the things, all of the apps. And it was, in hindsight, again, like such an obvious attempt at controlling the things I felt I could after entering a situation I didn't have control over, Yeah.
Absolutely.
Hey friends, Casey here. If you've ever listened to an episode and thought, I wish she'd go even deeper, or I wonder what she really thinks about that, I am so excited to share More Than Milestones Unfiltered, where I do exactly that. More Than Milestones Unfiltered is my private Substack community where I share 2 exclusive podcast episodes every single month. 2 episodes that will never make it to Instagram or the public feed. These are the even more raw, unfiltered stories, harder conversations, and the that's a story for another day moments I usually hold back on. If you want to join me there, just head to the show notes or my link in bio and subscribe. I'd love to see you inside. Oh, so, okay, all that to say, there's 2 more kind of big topics I would love for us to talk about. One of which, and I don't know if you feel there's a better way to talk about this, but I think a big piece of going back to the advocacy and having someone who you feel so confident is on your side, has your back, is kind of understanding midwifery, the
Midwifery?
role in the home birth versus hospital. Yes. And when you're considering birthing location or birthing plan or those factors that you can control going into it, is there information that you feel like is on a basic level really helpful for people to understand? Because I didn't know about the option to have a midwife with my first, and I would have loved to have, so I think maybe that would be a helpful
Yeah,
conversation.
of course. I think one of the things that's so important about birth, and I think, it's really important to give yourself the grace of not knowing. And one thing when we're particularly having our first babies is that we do not know ourselves in the context of giving birth, meaning that we are making decisions based on what other people do, what's been normalized, what is popular, what we're just told we do. And so we just go, well, I guess this is what I'm going to do. Everyone goes to the hospital, right? Like, I'm going to go to the hospital. Or, everyone goes to what we have here in the UK as a midwife-led unit, which is often, I think, in the States is sort of considered maybe like a birth center. So sometimes
Yes.
they're standalone or they're part of the hospital, but there are only midwives there. Some people choose home birth, but it's like every person has a context within which they live. So some people, all of their friends could have had home births and they had great experiences, and they say, well, I'm going to have a home birth too because like my friends did. The same can apply for hospital or birth center. Now, the thing about this is that what has informed that is other people. But what about you? Who are you? What do you actually want? What makes you feel safe? Because only you will live that. So if you think, actually, I really like a medical environment, this feels really scary, I need the safety of doctors, that's what feels safe to me. It does not matter what anyone else has done in their own experience, because you have done that introspective work to go, but me, as nice as home birth might have sounded for you, to me, that feels quite scary. And if it feels
Mhm.
scary, my response to it will be to be scared. And that's not conducive to sort of like a positive birth experience. And so all the time when you're thinking, what do I want? Ask yourself that question properly. What do I want? What feels safe for me? What feels safe for my birth partner, if that's your romantic partner? You know, what do they feel
Mhm.
comfortable with as well? Because it matters. If they're the person that's supporting you, they also need to feel safe with the decisions that have been made. But also,
Mhm.
what can I have access to? And sometimes, you know, it's a privilege to be able to have a midwife. Not everyone has the finances for the midwife. And so it's like, actually,
Mhm.
that doesn't apply to me. And so I have to, you know, discard it. And that's okay. But also kind of really checking in with yourself, but also speaking to those providers and checking how they make you feel. You know, your instincts work. They work. They just
Mhm.
need to be nurtured. And so all the time, go into that environment, be like, this feels good. I feel like if I'm vulnerable, I might feel at least a little bit safer in this environment. And then you go forward.
Yeah. I think that's such a powerful thing to do in general. And I think it's very hard for women to do that, to give ourselves that space of saying, like, how do I actually feel? And especially in the context of birth and having another child after a traumatic birth, which is something I would really love for us to talk about because I remember people saying after I came out of that postpartum haze, my kids are only 20 months apart between oldest and middle and youngest. And so many people were like, well, how did you decide to have another? And it was never really a question for me. I knew I wanted our family to have more than one child if that was something we were able to do. And so I never really gave myself the space to even, I think about it or process that until all of my kids were born. And that season was kind of over for me. And I was like, whoa, I didn't even check in with myself at all, like at any
Yeah.
point, not once. And I would love to kind of talk about that a little bit more. And because I know you talk a lot about how do you decide if
Yeah.
you want to have another baby after a traumatic birth. So what is your kind of take on that?
Yeah. So I think sometimes, and this is a cultural, societal thing that women are here to have babies. And so for most of us, even the kind of like being one and done is looked down upon. And so sometimes we can just autopilot it and be like, well, of course I'm going to have another baby, like duh. And we're like, oh, I
Mhm.
didn't even check if I'm like okay and why I'm doing that. But also if we know that we want more, it's kind of like, do you know what? I'm just going to press on and I'm just gonna have them all, and then I'll kind of maybe I'll check in with myself in like 20 years, like it's fine.
Mhm.
And the thing is, I think I say to people all the time when they're going to come and see me to debrief their birth experiences, and they say, do I come and see you when I'm pregnant with my second, or do I come and see you before? And I say, each experience is unique in and of itself. And I want you to talk through that experience without having the pressure and the weight and the kind of self expectation of a subsequent birth. And so see each for themselves and be like, okay, this happened in this one. What can I take from this one and apply to a subsequent one without being like, I want to count down because this baby's coming. So if you have
Mhm.
that luxury, work through each one before kind of having more. But also, what can happen when we have been traumatized is that we can become very reactive because we are in a state of fight or flight. And so we're kind of like, well, I'm just going to have another one. And do you know what? That last experience was so bad. I'm just going to have, let's say you had a terrible vaginal birth experience, and you say, I'm just going to have a cesarean section. And you go right to the polar opposite and you say, that feels safe. But that's reactive rather than being like, do you know what? I think I've thought about it. I've thought about what I enjoyed or what I didn't enjoy, what I think went wrong in that first experience. And in the subsequent experience, I'm going to go for this because this feels good. This feels safe. This feels like I have an understanding of my own response to traumatic events. And this is how I'm working with them. So
Mm.
I remember I had my daughter, so that was an emergency cesarean section, and I got pregnant with my son 3 years later. And I said, I'm going to have a home birth. And the hospital were like, no, you're not. And I was like, yeah. And they're like, that's very dangerous. That goes against guidelines. And what was really interesting, and I think it's important for listeners to understand as well, because there's a lot of judgment on people making those decisions and saying that's just so dangerous. I think we need to look at safety as something that is deeply personal, and that each person does not view safety in the same way, nor do they view risk in the same way. So yes, of course, there was a clinical risk to having a home birth following major abdominal surgery. That risk statistically was 1 in 200, the risk of the scar rupturing. Now, for me, that didn't feel like a big enough risk to risk my emotional and physical safety in a hospital. That felt like a more significant risk to me. And so I weighed it up and I was like, I'm having this baby at home. When weighing it up, I was like, well, if that doesn't work out, what is your safety net? What are you going to do? And I said, if it's not working at home, take me straight to theatre and deliver this baby via cesarean section. I don't want to be on a ward. I don't want to be induced. I don't want a Pitocin drip. Just take him out. And he was born at home within about 2 hours of active labor. So,
Wow. Wow.
and that was really, it was really interesting, because they said to me when I had my daughter, she was back to back and her head was a little bit like this. And they said, I don't think you'll be able to ever have a vaginal birth. And I was like, bet, game on.
I love it.
When it came to birthing that boy, when the midwife came and she checked me and she said, you're about 2 centimeters. And I'd said to her, no, I said, don't tell me how many centimeters I am, because that's going to be detrimental to my mindset. So she said to me, oh, your cervix admits 2 fingertips. And obviously I'm a midwife. So I was like, that's 2 centimeters. Yeah. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
And he was back to back. So similarly to my daughter. And I said, don't worry, it's fine. I said, just leave me alone. I'm fine. And I'm going to go into a little bit of detail here, so I'm just extending this. But 3 months before my son was born, my mum had died very, very suddenly. And
gosh, I'm so sorry.
That's okay. I got in the pool. I had the pool set up in my house and I hate water. It doesn't make me feel relaxed, but I thought, well, I'll have it here anyway. And I got in the pool and I started wailing and I was calling out for my mum. And I was like, oh, something happened there. And then I walked out of the pool. I was like, leave me alone. I told the midwives to go away. My husband wasn't there. I chose for him to not be there. My sister was there instead, and my doula. And I was like, close the door. I'm fine. Now, in that time, I tell you, I probably did a handstand. Like I was moving, just literally listening to my body, just to do all sorts of things. And when they came and examined me again after 2 hours, she said, this baby has fully rotated. He's front to back and you are 9 centimeters dilated. So
I just got full body chills. My gosh.
Literally, it was like, I'm doing what I want on my terms. There's a real power in that. And what I want the message to be in this is that whatever you want on your terms is all that matters. Doesn't matter if it's a cesarean section, doesn't matter if it's at home, doesn't matter if it's in hospital or a birth center, doesn't matter if it's under a tree. What you want still matters, even if you have to adapt and adjust it. But you being able to lean into that, even if it doesn't go that way, is important. So if you take nothing from what I've just said, it's check in with what you want and see if you can access it. And if you can't, see if you can adapt it. But that's the most important question to ask yourself when thinking about a subsequent birth is, what do I want? What do I need? What is safe for me? And how can I access it?
Yeah. Wow. Oh my gosh. That is so incredibly powerful. It's funny. I feel like there's a lot happening in my mind right now related to processing, again, that I don't think I've necessarily given myself the chance to, because listening to you say that is making me think about the OB that delivered my second and my third. And my first was born with shoulder dystocia, which was a big piece of that, hitting the oh crap button, right? And so there was a high risk. So shoulder dystocia, if anyone's not aware, is when the arm is not in a great position and they have to do either a maneuver to get them out, but there can a lot of times be some sort of fracture to either their clavicle or their humerus. And so there was a risk with my next birth that it could happen again. And so for a long time with my second, a C-section was on the table. And there was a couple OBs in the practice, but there was one specific one who every time I would come to her from a place of fear and be like, I just want to have a C-section. I don't even want to risk it. Like, she would be like, okay. We'll talk about it as it progresses. Like she never pushed me, but in hindsight, I know pretty confidently that she was going to encourage me to not go that route if she could avoid it. And she supported me so much through my pregnancy in that. And ultimately, I was able to deliver both of my subsequent kids without, a C-section or anything like that. But thinking about her now, I'm like, oh, she knew what she was doing. She totally knew what she was doing. And I'm so thankful for her. But I don't think I realized how much I was operating from a place of like, don't risk it, just.
Yeah,
So I love
totally.
that advice. I think that's really powerful. Okay. I know we're running out of time. I would love, I could talk to you all day, to talk a little bit about really like understanding or navigating parenting. Well, like the reality is, right? I don't want people to hear all of this and be like, yeah, trust me, I would love to be able to sit down and take some time to reflect, but I'm just trying to put one foot in front of the other. And I feel like sometimes like that being able to have like a concrete, we understand that like self-care is going to look different when you're 6 weeks postpartum than it's going to look like when your kids are 10. So do you have words of wisdom, which I already know you do, but words of wisdom about like parenting and navigating that and really still prioritizing yourself and communication with your partner if you have one, or really just that communication with yourself in subsequent pregnancies or, all of that.
Yeah. I think a lot of the time, there are so many privileged suggestions that people give, such as taking time for oneself, do all this
Mm-hmm.
stuff, or therapy, which we know is so expensive, for a lot of people inaccessible. And,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes people aren't ready for that either. And so it's actually, for me, one of the most important things is firstly saying, I'm aware of myself. I'm aware that I've got some stuff and I'm going to deal with it. Even just that real thing of just going, I got some stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
so that it doesn't shock you. You are aware of it and you're saying, when I have the capacity, I have the time or the financial means, I'm going to access it and I'm going to deal with it. So the first thing is just acknowledging that something happened to you that perhaps is going to impact your life, and it's there and you will get to it when you can. Gives it that space that it often doesn't have. So that's the first
I
thing.
love that.
The second thing is that actually, self-care is a capitalist construct, right? So it's going, go spend some money, get your nails done, go shopping, do whatever. And it's like, well, actually,
Mm-hmm.
what does self-care really look like? And sometimes it's going, instead of cleaning during that nap time, I'm going to take 5 minutes and I'm just going to sit with myself. I might listen to some music. I might sit in silence, but I'm just going to sit with myself. And if anything comes up in my brain, I'm just going to jot it down. I'm not going to look at it again. I'm just going to write it down. Notes on your phone, whatever. This is because a lot of the time we don't have time to journal and to process. But noting something that you can then go back and look at. There are two reasons for that. One is it showing you where your mind is at and something that matters because it's come up for you. But for a lot of people, being able to look back at that note will tell them how far they've come. So they say,
Mm.
3 months ago, I wrote a note that I couldn't ever see myself having a moment without this baby attached to me. But today, I left them with my mum for an hour. Progress, you know? And so those are
I love
things
that.
that you can be really good at. Just free. They're free. They're not, time consuming or taxing, but they're just making a sort of space for it. But the other thing is, a service like mine that isn't asking you to commit to a lifelong thing of, processing, but it's saying, come and speak to me for an hour and we'll work it through and give you those tools. But also, I will say this here, is that accessibility for me, particularly for mothers and non-birthing parents, so your partner, is so important that I have a paid forward service where people can just pay for strangers to access my support. So they
Oh,
can
I love that.
contribute towards a session or they can just get it for free. Just drop me a message and say, I need help. I can't afford it. I don't want your reasons. I don't need you to justify it. It doesn't matter. Even if you are lying, it won't serve you. So you do what you need to. And
Yeah.
the other
Oh my
thing
God.
is, everyone deserves support. Everyone deserves to process experiences, not only traumatic ones, but ones that are positive as well. We can talk about the things that we're
Mm-hmm.
happy about. You know,
Yeah.
we all of
Yeah.
those things matter. So having spaces as mothers, creating communities, finding our people, finding people who can anchor us and remind us of just how incredible we are. Go out, find your people. And if you can't go out, there are massive online communities of people who are there for you. And you just need to go put yourself out there a little bit and you'll find them.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I feel like this is the perfect spot to wrap this up for now and tell us, and we will put all of this in the show notes, but tell us, where can people find you? What offerings do you have? Yeah, where can people find you? Because this was
Yeah.
incredible.
So you can find me at Illiyin Morrison. And what I will say is that life and birth and motherhood are all political. I am a strictly political human being. And so don't be surprised by what you find, but know that my advocacy for human life and the value that I hold within that extends to all people. And so,
Mm,
this isn't fluff. This is real. This is raw. This is stuff that matters. And so if you come into my space, know that I'm holding you. I'm holding you in every political conversation. And this is about humanity. You can find my book, The Birth Debrief. You can get that on Amazon. You can also get the audiobook, which sometimes for mothers is much easier. You just put those headphones in
uh-huh.
and I'm the one that's reading it. So if you like my voice, you'll be
Amazing.
okay. If you don't,
Yeah.
sorry.
Love it.
And you can find my podcast, The Birth Debrief, on Spotify. These are 10-minute episodes that were made perfectly for mothers who perhaps don't have much time, where we talk about sex and intimacy postnatally. We talk about finding ourselves in our identity, and all sorts of things. So there are a good few episodes there as well for you to listen to. If you would like to access my debriefs, whether that's a paid forward session or to pay forward a session for someone who is in need, or to access it for yourself, www.illiyinmorrison.com, and you will find all of my services there.
Amazing. Thank you so much again. And that is all for today's episode of More Than Milestones. I hope it finds you if you need it.